Thank you. Thank you for that warm welcome, Heather. It's my absolute pleasure to be home in Scotland. As you heard from my description, I now live in Toronto in Canada, and I'm certainly going to talk about some of those experiences, but this is where home is. This is where my family is. This is where all of my own education is and where my career began, and my mother was a teacher. So I care passionately about the idea of a festival of learning and how we learn together and how we work together. It's also a bit intimidating. I always thought, wouldn't it be great if I got to contribute to Scottish education and come home? I hadn't anticipated I would be on this stage. So thank you for the invitation and thank you for the opportunity. And I've met with many of you over the past few days. And some of you know I'm very active on Twitter at Carol Campbell 4. So thank you to all of those of you who have been engaging in a conversation leading up to today around Scottish education. And I will say more about that in a moment. So can you put your hands up if you were here for the Deputy First Minister's keynote this morning? Can you put your second hand up if you were also here for Yong's keynote? All right, you get the long service stamina award, so congratulations to all of you. I hope you brought packed lunches and coffees and various snacks. So for those of you who have chosen to come and see me, I'm humbled, and you get the Distinguished Taste Award, of course. Going to get myself into trouble. So this is where I started. This is Comicko Glassery Primary School in Argyll and Bute. Shout out to Argyll and Bute. Thank you. And I'm going to draw on some international evidence. Of course, you heard that I have lived and worked in other countries, in England, America, and Canada. But I think one of my messages is start at home. Start with thinking about your own knowledge, your own experiences, your own evidence, and your own practices. And I think we heard that in Yong's keynote as well. Think about what you are already doing that's working well. What are those promising practices? Think about how you can share those. Think about how you deprivatize your practice. That's going to be one of my big messages. We talk about collaboration a lot, and collaboration is really important. But collaboration is really a process. And what I see when I've been involved in work where change is really happening, it's about us sharing what we know. It's about talking about our knowledge, about our experiences, about our successes, about our failures, but about our practices, so that a school on the west coast of Scotland can be learning from a school here in Glasgow or in the east coast of Scotland. And thinking about what is it that's already working here, because it's great to bring us in to come and talk to you, but also share what you already know. Now, there's lots of great research internationally, and much of it does apply when we think about things like reading and writing and all of those. Now, they need to be contextualized and adapted. So think about what we're learning globally, but I also really encourage you to think about what you're learning here within Scotland and share that. So I'm going to say, as the world gets even more global, it's deliberately blurry, your eyesight hasn't suddenly deteriorated in the past 10 seconds, you have to take a step back to see the big picture. Yong presented lots of convincing arguments. We're going to have a big discussion about data and evidence and information and assessments and knowledge and judgment. So today I'm going to say to you, use the Scottish Learning Festival to take a step back. A day out of school or out of your local authority or out of whichever organisation you're working in. Take a step back. And when I've worked on educational change, I started working more and more at a larger scale. So the reference to Ontario, we have 2 million students in 5,000 schools, and I worked at the government level. So you start to think, well, how do we support improvement and support teachers and learners? But actually, it's not a question of scale. We say that, how do we bring it to scale? It's a question of people. Now, yes, of course, funding matters, governance matters, structures matter, bureaucracy matters, all of these things. But for me, education is fundamentally about people. And I actually think we heard that in the Deputy First Minister's keynote this morning when he spoke about the interactions between pupils and teachers. And I heard the other conversations about educational psychologists and parents. But in the end, it's about people. And I think if we think about humanity, that core value that binds us together, the state of being human, the quality of being humane, about putting people at the heart of education, your pupils, your children, your young people, yourself as professionals and as parents. And I want to say thanks to David Hughes, whose photograph this is, from Thornley Park Primary School. Many of you sent tweets, and I'm going to use them throughout the keynote, so be prepared. So thank you, David. Yours is the first. So John Swinney also spoke about this strong tradition. I'm very proud of Scottish education, and you should be too. I know in the day-to-day there's a whole set of things that you're juggling with, but Scotland was one of the first countries in the world to have an education system back in the Middle Ages with the church schools. And the commitment to education as a public right and a human right. And the idea then of the ladder pairs. The idea of a young boy from a humble upbringing who's perhaps had academic ability, but was perhaps also sporting or musical, and how through free public education he could advance on to other careers and opportunities and experiences. And that's very deep-rooted in our tradition and in our legacy. And it continues to this day. And I should say, you know I'm going to say next, for some of you that know, I'm going to say, what about the last of parts? But Scotland was also one of the first countries in the world to have freely available education for girls, starting back in the 15th and 16th century. Some parts of the world still don't have that for girls. So I ask about the lads and the lassies, and from the parts to the whole, and the vision of curriculum for excellence, that it's not that we're made of parts, but actually I think some of what Yong was talking about, how we come together as our unique selves, and what that combination of abilities may or may not be. This is me. Wasn't I cute? This is me in the middle too. My husband loves this photo because it's a bit blurry, but I have sheer determination on my face that I'm going to win that race, even though that boy is clearly twice my size. And my husband's from Glasgow. He should know, never underestimate a wee, determined Scottish woman. And this is when we came to visit with the Scottish Council of International Council of Education Advisors at Windigool Primary School. We had the opportunity to meet with your pupils. And they were so excited. I have to say, all they wanted to know was Nicola Sturgeon coming to visit. I was chopped liver. Apart from Kyra in the corner, who said, it's all right, I met her at the Kelpies. I'll talk to you. So we think about, how do we support all of our pupils, all of our children, and all of their complexity and diversity? And this notion of Scottish education, the ladder parts, was one of meritocracy. An individual with ability who beats the odds, who succeeds. And you hear those stories. In some ways, Yong and I are also examples of people who have come and strived and succeeded. I grew up on a farm in Scotland. So thinking about these, but we actually know that not everybody's going to succeed through sheer individual grit. There are systemic and structural barriers of poverty, and that's why the attainment gap challenge really matters. That's why some of your questions around special education and supports and mental health really matter. So we have to move forward in thinking, how do we support all of our students in all of their complexities to succeed in whatever ways are appropriate to them? And I say about expectations, yes, high expectations, but I say, go beyond your aspirations. I never dreamed I would be standing here. So think about what that future may be for the young people in your classrooms. And think about all of the students and the young people in Scotland. And thanks again to my Twitter friends for these wonderful images. The children of the future, whether they're playing or engaged in digital literacy, reading, writing, creativity, all of these things. Think about how we support them when we have that conversation. And then in my own work, absolutely, children and pupils are at the center, but actually my work's with professionals. So I think about, how do we support all of us to succeed? And as I said, my work's increasingly on a large scale. And I think about all those lists, you may have seen them, of how we change education systems, whole system reform, educational improvement. And for me, I have to say, I want to put humanity at the center of that. And sometimes it's much more a list of things to do. But if we go back to those values and think about those pieces, and Curriculum for Excellence with well-being as being a key strand of that, you're way ahead of us than in Ontario. We added well-being 3 years ago. It's a new thing. We're still figuring out. So thinking about well-being, so of course, equity and excellence, the themes of SLF, the themes of Curriculum for Excellence, the themes of the work currently, equity and excellence matter. But we don't want, partly to Young's story, we don't want everybody to be equitable in a narrow range, or unhappy or unhealthy. So we think about how do we support our adults and our young people to be rounded humans with the well-being that is crucial and was asked about earlier. And then, of course, the work that those of us in education do around curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, technology. Your role as leaders, whether in formal leadership positions or in other informal leadership positions, and the much wider policies and supports and enablers. So thinking about how we put people at the center. And then for me, with my interest in you, professionals, leaders, how we respect and engage your complexity and diversity and uniqueness, and your learning needs and your well-being needs, and the piece around your professional learning. So how do we bring all of these together? And I think about these 5 Ps. For those of you that have read the abstract, you know where I'm going with this. Sorry, they're not Cs. I'm Carol Campbell, so I love Cs. But I'm going to talk about these in terms of leading with evidence for educational improvement, and I'll work through this as we go through the next few minutes. Persuasion, precision, professionalism, partnerships, and perseverance. How do you use evidence in your role as leaders, whatever your role is? So persuasion. Some of you will have heard me say this before. Leadership is defined as the exercise of influence. Think about that. How do you intentionally use your influence? Negatively or positively, but you have it. You have to intentionally think about how you use your influence. We heard the Deputy First Minister this morning being very clear on purpose. Well, for me, persuasion is about bringing together purpose and passion, and how you actually communicate that, and how you use it in your role as leaders. How you communicate your purpose and your passion. And I love this quote. The things you're passionate about are not random, they are your calling. You've been called to be here today. You made the decision to come, to sign up, to come into this room, to be involved in a career in education or working with young people if you're in other roles. You may be parents. What is it that you are passionate about now? What brought you into this career? What keeps you in this career? And what are you going to move forward with in the year and years ahead? So I ask you that question. And I heard the Deputy First Minister, we came as the International Council for Education Advisors 2 weeks ago, and I heard the Deputy First Minister talk about these values that he spoke about this morning. They're inscribed in the Mace, in the Parliament, in the Scottish Parliament, and they're in Curriculum for Excellence. And I have to say, I was really touched when he spoke about these values. They spoke to me. I thought about wisdom, moving beyond information to knowledge, the job of education to inspire wisdom. I thought about justice, about a sense of fairness, that idea in closing the attainment gap, compassion. We know that the biggest difference in a child's life is whether somebody cares about them. Compassion and integrity. I hope in the education profession we all hold ourselves to the highest standards of integrity. So I tweeted these this morning when the Deputy First Minister mentioned them. I knew I had them here. Oh boy, I got a bit of a Twitter storm in reaction. What do you mean these are Scottish values? What about Canadians? How can these be Scottish values? Are you claiming them? Well, let's just say, if you have wisdom, it's not an exclusive commodity. Let's hope that actually it's an expansive one, that we would hope, of course, to my theme of humanity, that the world would be wise and wiser, and that we could contribute to part of that in terms of our work around justice and compassion and integrity. So I'm not claiming these as exclusive, but I'm saying they're important, they're fundamental, they're in the Scottish Constitution, and they're in your curriculum. And I think they're good values to live by. So I asked some of you on Twitter, what's worth fighting for in Scottish education? Yes, I haven't mastered the short hashtag version yet. These are power poses. They're on TED, you know, the TED Talks. I actually learned these from a grade 3 elementary teacher in Ontario, Michelle Cordy, who's phenomenal. If you Google her name, she'll come up. She's just phenomenal. And the idea is thinking about how you center yourself when you're having to think about things. So for those of you that are now in your third keynote, maybe you want to just stand up for a minute because we're about to go into a session. So come on, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. So I'm going to ask you what's worth fighting for in Scottish education. Now I should say I'm actually a pacifist. I think keeping the peace can be much more difficult than starting a fight, but so use whatever metaphor works for you. These are your choices. You can do a power pose like this, or you can say this, because we're about to talk about your power to change Scottish education. Come on, don't be shy, don't be shy. One of them, power pose, power pose, power pose. I have to say, after Michelle taught me this, I was going to a really important meeting, and I thought, right, I'm going to try that power pose. And I was in the reception area, and I'm kind of like this, hoping nobody would notice. So you can feel free to sit down. I'm going to I asked, what's worth fighting for in Scottish education? Almost 200 of you responded within the space of a week. And all being well, I'm about to show you those in very rapid fire. Don't worry, this is not going to take 3 hours, but you feel free. It should take about 7 minutes. So I'm going to encourage you to observe, read, listen, and reflect. I was initially going to add music and try and be very jazzy, but I actually think the key thing is to let these images and these voices and these texts speak. So as you're reading and as you're looking and as you're watching, I ask you to reflect on what resonates, what you agree with, what you disagree with, what would you add? And I really hope this is going to work. Here we go. So for those of you who want to, there's a Storify of thank you to Scott Ed Chat, and I also know some of you are going to teach me tonight. If you were one of the people that responded, I'm going to ask you to stand up, please. Can you please stand up if you're in the room? I know who some of you are. Come on, please stand up. Stand up. Please take a bow and thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you. And I know, for example, in Crieff Primary School, they had an activity where they asked the children to discuss this. So don't feel it's a one-off activity. I mean, feel free to continue to contribute to this discussion, and thank you. You know, what struck me was there were, of course, issues and challenges about recruitment and development and instruction and assessment. But those phrases of bold pupils and brave professionals and joy and enjoyment really struck me. So, of course, I'm going to turn it to you now. What are you going to fight for in Scottish education? What is it that you think is most important that we, or you, hold on to? Or what do you want to change? What is it? And then, what are you going to do? Because it's all well and easy to say what somebody else should do. If only so-and-so did this. What are you going to do? What is something you can do to continue to fight? Or if you don't want the metaphor of fight, advocate, support, encourage, develop. So, I know it's an auditorium, but I'm going to ask you just for a couple of minutes to turn to the person next to you and reflect on what you've just seen and what it might be that's going through your mind at the moment about what's important to fight for. Okay? Turn, groups of 2 or 3. Okay, I'm going to bring you back. Still on? Thank you. I'm going to bring you back. So for those of you who are on Twitter, feel free to continue that conversation as well as, of course, in real life here over the next day and a half at the Scottish Learning Festival and onwards into your own work as you think about these questions. I like this quote. We say actions speak louder than words. Somehow we still fall for words first. I work with a lot of politicians, and sometimes I think about this. I have to say, I don't think your Deputy First Minister is short of action either. So we're thinking about how do you take these visions, these passions, the persuasion, the things that we're talking about or reading or seeing. What do we do next? So my second P, for those of you who are following, precision, the quality of being exact, the qualities of being careful and accurate. Young mentioned Michael Fullan. Michael Fullan has a saying that being right is not a strategy. So how do we take those bold visions and brave professionals and think about what specifically are we doing? Are you doing? Can we do? So I think about Curriculum for Excellence and the goals and the vision that's in there and the work that you are doing to bring that to life in your day-to-day work, for those of you that are in schools or in local authorities or in national organizations, around successful learners, confident individuals, responsible citizens, and effective contributors. Thinking about how you get precise, how we turn these visions and values into the next steps forward. And what does that mean? So I ask, when we talk about the attainment challenge, which I think is very, very important and I support, which students, which schools, teachers and leaders, which parents and communities, and of course for schools that are not in the attainment challenge, all the needs that you have as well in your communities, and the fact that there are children in poverty or in disadvantage or in special education, new immigrants, language learners, and the list goes on throughout schools all over Scotland. So which students, which schools require what specific supports and targeted resources? And this is probably where we're going to disagree a little bit, Jan. Thinking about how do we move forward with that commitment to equity and excellence, or excellence and equity? How do we move forward with that goal of closing the attainment gap while also continuing to raise overall standards, supporting all learners, whatever stage they're at in their learning or their age or their development? And that question of what is this gap? What is this gap? So here's how we measure it in Ontario. We look at the performance of schools, and I know that's a hot issue here at the moment. How do you do that in a way that's educationally appropriate and sensitive? And in this diagram chart, what you're seeing in orange are the number of schools that were identified as low performing. Now, it is based on reading, writing, and mathematics assessments. It's based on elementary or primary schools where less than half of the children were meeting what's called the provincial standards, so the curriculum standards in reading, writing, or mathematics. When we started in this work over 10 years ago, that was 13% of our schools out of 4,000 schools. This is just a 10-year timeline. It's now 6% of our schools. It's 87 schools. So we have moved. And what you see in the green are schools where over 75% of their children are achieving at higher standards and higher levels. Now, we can debate the measurement and all of these things, but my message to you is actually when you look at how we support closing the attainment gap, supporting students, supporting schools, improvement can happen with attention and resources and professional judgment and practice. And you're going to ask, well, how did we do that? And the one thing I want to say to you is we do not name or shame or close schools or rank them or any of the things that I know people are afraid of when we go down the road of data, and it's a very strong caution to take. What we say is, who are the schools that need additional support? How can we support the professionals? How can we support the children? How can we support their parents and communities? We don't make this publicly available, although you can't control what the media does. But it's much more about how do we support and how do we work together. So I shared this with some other people recently. When we go in and work in partnership to support a school, the first conversations with the head teacher around their students, their staff, their teachers, their community, areas where they think that they perhaps need additional support. Maybe areas where you as a leader would look for additional support, and opportunities to get out of your school building and to go into other schools or to work in networks with other head teachers or other PTs or other teachers. So we look at that. We look at how we support a culture of professional learning in the school. We ask whether the actual learning resources are there. Books at the appropriate levels for the children to read. Tools and resources around mathematics. Technology. Is it present or isn't it present? And how can we support that? And then the teachers work together through a process of gathering their own evidence. Student work. Whether that's from your classroom or from homework, but examples of student work. And saying, what do I think within my class at the moment is the area where my students are struggling? Who are the students that are struggling? Is it a particular area of the curriculum? Is it a particular area of my teaching? What's happening here? What am I currently doing? And then think about, with colleagues, what am I going to try out that's different? What am I going to try out? And this is one process. I'm not saying it's the one, but it's one that we've used. It takes 6 weeks. So then you go back and you begin to try out different ways of teaching and experimentation, thinking about how do we support our students, thinking about how I'm going to change some of my teaching strategies, or my assessment strategies, or my use of resources. And coming together with my community, my professional community, and talking about it throughout this process. What's working, what's not working? Can I come into your classroom? Can we have? Now, it takes time. It does take time. It takes time to be able to come together and to go in and out of each other's classrooms. And then the key, moderated marking. Coming together as groups and talking about, you know, this is what I think about this piece of work, students' work. What do you think, pupils' work? What grade would you give it? How would you assess it? Why did you say that? And when we started, people were all over the place. But then having that conversation about how do I judge and consider and assess this piece of work? And for me, that's going to be really key as you move forward with professional judgment. The moderated marking piece around professional judgment. Now, that doesn't mean standardization. It doesn't mean that you all do the same thing in the same way at the same time. But it's about a professional conversation about grades and levels and assessments and student work and teaching and learning. And the bottom one, share. Share, share, share. So back to my message, if you remember one thing, deprivatize your practice. That's risky, but there are ways of doing it, whether it's online, in-person conversations, staff meetings, professional learning, in the car park, I don't care, but share, 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 share. Because that's the only way we're going to be able to learn and support each other as we move forward. And some of you will be in schools or local authorities that are really fantastic on this, and some of you might not be. So thinking about who are your colleagues in your network. And that's how we more than halved the number of low-performing schools, through professional dialogue and judgment and practice. And one of the other ways is around the equity piece. So the orange bar, the big bar, is the gap between the achievement results of students with English language learners, students identified with English language learning needs, and all students overall. So basically, the larger the bar, the bigger the gap in performance results. The orange was where we were when we started. The green is where we are now. Now, there's still a gap, but it's moved considerably from being almost a 30 percentage point difference in achievement for students who English was their second language, contrasted with students who English is their first language. So the same message, targeted resources, focused action, oral literacy, early learning, all of these pieces really matter. Now, I'm going to use the Scottish value of integrity and say we haven't got it all right. This is our special educational needs students. And there's still those issues around complexity and how we support all students to learn and succeed, and the combination of supports and additional needs that are there. So the attainment gap is poverty, but it's multifaceted and it's intersectional. And keeping thinking about who are the students that are struggling and how are you going to support them. So the idea of equity. We use this in our teacher education program at OISE. I saw a version of it in one of the attainment challenge schools that I've been into. So I'm sure you're all familiar with this. So equality, the idea that if we treat everyone the same, it's a level playing field, but it's not. That's my argument against meritocracy. So for equity, it's actually differential treatment depending on an individual's needs and how we support them and what are those additional needs that may be required. Of course, that's better. But I look at this and, sorry, but I worry about this picture because they're all behind a big fence. And I think about those structural and systemic issues that we need to look at. And while they're all dressed pretty much the same and they're the same color and they're all watching baseball, and apologies to Americans or new Americans, I don't play baseball, I don't want to play baseball. It's back to your point, Young. So how do we ensure that piece around personalized learning? So we support every individual to succeed, but we look at those bigger systemic issues around poverty, around inequity, around community, around the children who are the only person in their house that's getting up in the morning and has any routine. about people who are looking at 3 generations of unemployment. All of these factors matter, and of course you can't solve that on your own, but you can make a huge difference. And those of you that are parents and families can make a huge difference. So I thank you for that, and I ask you to push that bar even further from equity to ensuring that all students are supported. And my point about humanity and well-being. I believe literacy and numeracy are equity strategies. I believe that if you don't have the basics in reading, writing, and math, you're going to really struggle. And I know we can debate that, but I don't think they're the only thing. I think this debate about an either-or, narrowing the curriculum's wrong. I know that you can integrate literacy and numeracy across the brilliant examples we saw of play and experiential learning and all of those things. So I don't think any discussion about standards should be about everybody achieving the same on standardized results that are actually not meaningful, because the goal is to develop all young people for their futures as citizens and their well-being. We hear this from some other countries around test prep and the stress and all of those things, and you know that, and that is the danger that you absolutely have to avoid. How you support the well-being of your young people and the goals of Curriculum for Excellence, and how you support your own well-being in all of the diversity that are in your schools, around the children that want to play, the children that want to reflect, the children that want to ask big questions. It says on the stone, does the earth have an owner? What a great question. And you. Everyone has an invisible sign hanging from their neck saying, make me feel important. Never forget this message when working with people. I'm a researcher. We did research on the students who drop out of our high schools. And what we found was the difference was a caring adult or not in the school. It could be a teacher, it could be a guidance counsellor, it could be the sports coach, it could be anyone. And of course, a caring adult at home or in the extended family or in the church or in a community group or in a sports group. But somebody who cares made a huge difference. And I firmly believe the same applies to adults. That we have someone who will listen when we go home at the end of the day, and who's the person that's going to attend to our well-being. So I think when you hold up those values of Curriculum for Excellence, and you think about confident and successful and all of those things, who is supporting you and how are you supporting each other in that quest around well-being? I firmly believe it applies to the adults just as much. This one's a bit blurry. So what I am fighting for is teachers. Their working day doesn't end when the bell goes. Now, I know there are many other professionals involved, but thinking about how we support each other. So, professionalism. Professor Hargreaves, who was with us earlier, human capital, our individual development through our careers, social capital, collaboration, professional learning communities, opportunities to work together, decisional capital, judgment. Being a professional who has the right to make judgments. So I know that there are many people in this room. Can you put your hand up if you're a teacher, you're still in a classroom? Thank you. I know many of you have been teachers at different stages in your career, and many of you are in other professions. I want to say to you today, let this be the last time you ever say, I am just a teacher. Never say that someone's just a teacher. Somebody said this to me on Monday. I was with Skell on Monday. Oh, I'm just a teacher. No. Think about your role, whether you're formal leaders or informal leaders, and the work that you do, whatever role you're in. So, I was asked recently by the College of Teaching in England. England are they're looking into the GTC. They're looking, where's Ken go? There. They're looking to the GTC and saying, how can we have a College of Teaching? And they said, how could we make teaching a knowledge profession? And I said, what do you mean? It is the knowledge profession. It's not about making it a knowledge profession. It's about recognizing that and valuing it and developing it and supporting it. So, the knowledge profession, your knowledge, your expertise, your years of training, your years of experience. But of course, there's also other evidence out there. There's research evidence, there's data. So how do we bring these together in a professional discussion? And how do we bring these together around learning and teaching? So this is a learning festival. I love learning. Canadians love me because apparently I say learning in a funny way. But teaching really matters too. And we can debate what that does or doesn't mean. But I want to say, let's make this a festival of teaching too. And whether you're in a leadership role, we're all teachers in some sense. And how do we get back to valuing and supporting teaching? And of course, so much of the debate at the moment is about curriculum and assessment. And of course, pedagogy absolutely runs through curriculum and assessment. But also thinking about how you share your actual teaching strategies and teaching practices. And I always think of the work of Lee Schulman around curricular knowledge. What does the curriculum involve? Subject knowledge. What is the nature of the subject, the detailed content? But pedagogical knowledge. What is the repertoire of teaching strategies that bring together curricular knowledge and subject knowledge? So thinking about how we share teaching. And I think about work that I'm currently involved in around professional learning. So this is work across Canada. There is no national education department in Canada. It's the responsibility of 10 provinces and 3 territories, and each one is different. So I've been looking at professional learning across Canada because nobody's done it before. And for me, this is an equity issue. If professionals have inequitable access to their learning, that has huge implications for students' learning. And it's unbelievable. I've spoken to teachers and head teachers who have not been outside of their school for 15 years. I've spoken to other people who say, oh, I got a $5,000 grant and I went to an international conference. I've spoken to people in rural parts of Canada and they can't afford to get out of school because of the travel costs or the supply issues. So this is an equity issue. And what we see is the importance of a range. There is no one-size-fits-all to professional learning as there isn't to student learning or to leadership development. That piece around content knowledge really matters. So for those of you that are involved in collaborative inquiry, make sure the substance of it matters as well as the opportunity to talk. One of my friends calls it co-blaboration if it's just talking. A focus on student outcomes, how your learning connects to your students, or for those of you that are at a different level, how your learning connects to the learning of other professionals in the system. And I don't mean narrowly only attainment, but student outcomes in terms of engagement and joy, and all of the things that were in those pictures that you saw earlier, well-being, health. A balance of teacher voice and system coherence. 3 big issues came up in our work across Canada. It may be different here. Time, money, and who decides what professional development, who goes on. So, when do you get to decide what you learn and when does somebody else decide? And how do you get that balance? And actually, we don't know what the right balance is. Because there's times when, of course, it's important to a school improvement process or to a local authority process or to a national strategy. But then there's other times when it's your curiosity or your learning or your area of need. And thinking about what the range of professional learning for that is, like coming to an event like this. Using evidence, using research embedded and integrated into professional learning. Active and variable. So for those of you that read lots of research like I do, there's a big debate. Workshops are bad. Conferences are really bad, apparently, according to some of my academic colleagues. So it should all be job embedded. And yet, when I spoke to professionals, they said they wanted both. They want times to come out of their everyday routine, to get new ideas, to hear new ideas, to meet new people, to see things that they maybe wouldn't see in their school or in their community. So it's not an either-or, it's a range. It's a range of experiences. Collaboration does matter. Opportunities to dialogue, to share, to learn, to listen. But so does times to just sit and reflect. How many of you really have time to sit and reflect and read and think? So that combination, job embedded. Job embedded is really big in the professional learning literature. It's important, of course. You want to learn things that are practical. But that doesn't mean it has to be within your own classroom or your own school. You can learn things that are practical in a whole range of ways, whether it's through social networks or conversations or teach meets or reading. So the question is not about isolated within a building, but about how you learn. Ongoing resources, big one, resources. How do we ensure that there is actually support around supply cover and access to learning and resources for those of you that are here, and I know many of you people couldn't be here. And leadership. For those of you that are leaders, your role really matters. Your role really matters. And we discuss this, like I have a book to published on Monday. I was emailing all my co-authors, we've published our book, and I'm like, I'm in a hotel on my own, this wasn't how I imagined it. But we're talking about how do we support professionals to develop their learning and their networks. And what's the role of leaders? And we've been asking this. We've been asking teachers, if you had the opportunity to be leaders of your own learning, what would you do? What would you do? And the Deputy First Minister spoke about the importance of letting teachers teach. Well, absolutely. But it's the importance of letting all professionals lead and learn as well as teach. And thinking about, we've been asking, what would you do? And we've been working on a program called the Teacher Learning and Leadership Program. And I've also been talking here in Scotland with SKEL around their Teacher Leadership Program. When teachers have the opportunity to take forward their own learning, they receive a project and funding. They collaborate. 95% reached out and collaborated with other people. So teachers have the opportunity to take forward a project and they collaborate. They collaborate online and they collaborate in person. They engage with research. They come to events, they listen and they learn, and they talk to others. When they're asked to provide their learning to other people, they lead workshops. 73% are online. Blogging, tweeting, all of these areas. They work, if they have the opportunity, with other teachers side by side. They present, they meet, and some of them write. So thinking about what they share, really practical, coming back to that practical. So when I say to you about teaching, I say about sharing resources and deprivatization, sharing those resources and thinking about them. And look at these results. 89% improved their knowledge, 89% improved their practice, 61% collaboration, and self-efficacy, confidence. These are impressive results through collaboration and sharing and learning. So thinking about how you share your knowledge, making your tacit knowledge explicit. So you start with you. What is it you know that you can share? What do you want to share with others? What do you want to develop? Working in groups, but going beyond groups, because quite often you're either put in a group or you're working with people that you know in a group. So you network, like events like this, sharing, learning, and sharing your practices and your knowledge. Thinking about, for those of you who are interested, what is it that you can take forward? How are you going to take that forward? How are you going to learn? How are you going to collaborate with other people? How are you going to share that learning? And what is it you're going to share? And leaders, formal leaders. This is head teachers. So this is Vivian Robinson's work that you might be familiar with. Her work on the role of school leaders says that the most important thing school leaders can do is engage in your own learning and support the learning of the staff in your school. This is now being debated, but that's the 0.84 effect size. The other things are establishing goals, resourcing, planning and coordinating, and an orderly environment. So for those of you who are head teachers, do you spend double your time engaging in your own learning and your teacher's learning versus ensuring resourcing and an orderly environment on all of these factors? I doubt it. Time and workload become huge issues at every level of the education system. Time and workload comes up over and over again. So thinking about how you move forward, and who is it that you can move forward with? You cannot do this alone. Who can support you in your work to close the attainment gap, to support all students to succeed and learn, to support your own learning. Who are the partners nationally or locally that you can engage with? I have to show you this because I'm the director of this. It's the Knowledge Network for Applied Education Research. And we've been setting up practice and research partnerships across Ontario. And we've just launched 2, and they won't be unfamiliar topics to you: mathematics and well-being. Because we're saying, how can we bring together professional knowledge with research evidence in ways that support schools? But what we've learned from this, and you probably know this, networks and partnerships take time. It takes time. It actually takes leadership. It takes some key individuals and key organizations to come together. It requires clarity of what is the outcome you want to achieve? What's the purpose? How are we going to work together? How are we going to communicate together? Who's responsible? And most importantly, it takes trust. And that is such a fragile thing. So think about who are your existing partners you can further work with, but who might be the other people that you want to reach out to? So feel free to tweet them. They think I'm in Scotland on holiday. They keep saying, oh, Carol, you're not going to Scotland again. So this is why I have to tell you about them, so they know that I am actually working here today. Feel free to go on. Everything's open access and online. There's resources around mathematics and well-being, as well as many other resources. So I love this picture. You're wondering, why is there a picture of a dog on the theme of partnerships? This is actually a partnership with Lomond and Trossachs that was one of the Twitter responses. But thinking about who are your existing partners? Who is it that you can draw on? Parents as partners, community groups, family groups, formal partnerships, multi-agency. Are there other people you need to connect with? And how will you continue to develop collaboration and trust over time? Back to my theme of, in the end, it's about people and it's about relationships. And that really matters. And you cannot do this on your own. So, my final P. Perseverance. Continued effort and determination, particularly in the course of adversity. I think we're a hardy lot in Scotland. I'm that wee girl that was determined to beat the boy that was twice my size. I think people that work in education or work with children and young people have inner strength, and the people that you engage with and deal with every day takes every bit of your resilience. And thinking about how you persevere, whatever role you are in, how you lift each other up and how you support each other. I work in university. I get asked by students, what's the secret to success? And they want me to say, it's okay, go change the world. And I tell them this, and they look a bit deflated. There is no elevator to success. Maybe some of you are moving faster than others, but it takes hard work. None of this can be done in a day or a term, maybe not even a school year. And for some of you, for all of us, for me anyway, it's about my career. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I know many of you have been engaged longer. But, it takes daily hard work and determination and perseverance and celebrating every success along the way and dusting yourself off and sharing and learning and saying what worked and what didn't work and what can we do and what can we change and what can we support. So I say to you to come back to those values of the Scottish Mace, of wisdom, justice, compassion and integrity, and of curriculum for excellence, to be successful learners, to be confident, to be responsible, to be effective, and to think about what that means for you, not just for the children that we serve, that you serve. And who is your support network? Who is your support network? Who's the person that you can talk to, whether it's in work or outside of work, or at the weekend, or wherever? Who is going to be the person that continues to give you strength? And who can support you? Because your well-being matters. So I have a quote from Buddha. If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. I don't know all of you. I know I'm pretty hard on myself. I'm harder on myself than I am on anyone else. I think most of us in education are like that. So think about your own compassion. And then for those of you that's like, oh, she's gone off, she's away, I'm hoping I can get away with this joke in Scotland. A negative person sees the glass of water half empty. A positive person sees it half full. A realistic person adds 2 shots of whiskey, 2 cubes of ice, and says, cheers. I have one final slide. I am a pragmatist. You know, there are things you can change, and there are things you have to think about how you work creatively with. So my message to you is dream big. I always say to my students, there are no small dreams. Dream big. Lead with influence. You have influence. Use it. Engage all. Pasi Sahlberg talks about GERM, the Global Education Reform Movement. Well, I say a different infection. An infection like laughter, like energy, like positivity. Be infectious. Be focused and be strategic, but be practical and proactive. Embody the professionalism that is part of our profession. Nurture partnerships and be the leaders and learners that you seek to develop around those values and those goals. And with that, I say, remember what's worth fighting for in Scottish education, and thank you all for being here today.